Okay, we've heard from the government. Now let's hear from the opposition. I'm joined by former Union Finance and Home Minister P. Chidambaram. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Chidambaram. Let's be clear. The government says now that this agitation is no longer a farm agitation. This is now a political agitation where various vested interests, including the opposition, are targeting Narendra Modi, spreading disinformation, misinformation. How do you respond to that?
The opposition parties are targeting nobody. The farmers have placed demands. It's for the government to respond. Whether they've responded adequately, I can't say. But I think it's completely unfortunate. Not only unfortunate, it is calamitous for the government to call the farmers Maoists, urban Naxals, Tukde gang, agents of Pakistan and China. I think it's completely wrong.
So the minister, Prakash Javadekar, I spoke to, says we are making a distinction between farmers and those who are riding on the back of the farmers to serve their own agendas, raise the issues of Delhi riots, calling for people to be released from jail, or indeed unleashing Khalistani slogans. They claim we are making a distinction. We are not saying all farmers are part of any Tukde gang.
So identify those people and arrest them if you can. These are all excuses. There are thousands and thousands of farmers on the border. And you now suddenly stand up and say, I've identified the Naxalite, I've identified the Maoist, I've identified the Tukde gang. Name them, arrest them, and take them away. There are thousands and thousands of farmers, and you're talking to 23 farmer leaders or 25 farmer leaders. Call them and talk to them. Why are you talking to them if you think that the overwhelming number is Tukde gang?
The question is, the government says, look, we have an open mind. We've been negotiating with these farmer groups. We've had 6 rounds of negotiations. We need a middle ground. If the farmer organizations take a maximalist position that repeal all laws or else, as do the opposition parties, then where is that middle ground? So the government says negotiation must be based on open minds on both sides.
This is a very curious argument. Let's assume that the Chinese have encroached, say, 1,000 yards or 1,000 meters into India. And they turn around and say, we have to have a meeting ground. We have to have give and take. We go back 500 meters, you yield 500 meters. Would you accept that? If the government has passed a law which is unacceptable to the farmers, which is harmful to the farmers, repeal that law. And you are now proposing amendments, reenact a law. Repeal and reenactment is a well-known parliamentary device.
But so is amendment. So are amendments. That, let's be clear, Mr. Chidambaram. There could be amendments made if there are specific concerns. The government says we are willing to discuss those concerns clause by clause in each of the 3 acts.
So you can bring a new act with those amendments. You can bring a new act, retain whatever sections you want to retain, you have agreed to retain, and change whatever sections you want to change. Repeal and reenactment is a simultaneous provision, simultaneous exercise. There are hundreds of repeal and reenactment laws in this country. You bring a new law, where you have all the agreed clauses, and in the last section, last clause of the bill, you will repeal the present act. So you can repeal and reenact.
I'll come to exactly why you feel so, but I just want to understand. You said initially that this is not about Narendra Modi. However, increasingly the sense one gets is that the opposition is seeing this as their opportunity to gherao the Prime Minister. At one stage, there are those who say the Prime Minister doesn't reform, he's not an instinctive reformer, he's not pushing ahead with reform. Now when he attempts reform, the critics suddenly turn around and say, hey, wait a minute, why are you reforming the agriculture sector? A sector which you and others in the past have also said needs to be opened up.
This is not reform. What the Congress manifesto said was reform. You open thousands of farmers' markets. make them accessible to the farmers so that a farmer does not have to travel 25 kilometers to sell his produce. Open thousands and thousands of farmers' markets in small towns and large villages, make them accessible to the farmer, and then over a period of time, the APMC will become irrelevant. But each of these farmers' markets must be lightly regulated. In fact, if I was drafting a law, I would only have two regulations. One, the farmers' market will weigh your produce and will stipulate that no one can buy or sell at less than the MSP. That's all that is required.
No, but no one can buy and sell less than an MSP. Effectively means that you're making the giving the MSP some kind of a legal sanctity. Now, you could have done this when you, in some way, you're giving the MSP a kind of statutory basis. Now, there
What
will
is
be,
wrong?
but you could have done it in all the years that you were in power. You never did it.
That was not necessary because the MSP was never an issue. The MSP was never in controversy. Nobody suspected our motives that a Shanta Kumar committee report will be introduced stealthily. The motives of the government are suspect because of the Shanta Kumar report. Shanta Kumar report wanted to get rid of PDS, wanted to get rid of FCI, wanted to get rid of MSP. So once you say anybody can buy, irrespective of MSP, there is a cloud on the MSP. The farmers are worried that MSP is in jeopardy. When we were in government for 10 years, did the farmers question our motives about MSP? Today they're questioning the motives about MSP, dispel those doubts and say no, MSP will remain. We are now stipulating nobody, individual, trader, corporate, nobody can buy, nobody can sell less than MSP.
You know,
if the government is so confident, if the government is so confident that opening up the market will mean prices better than MSP, then why can't the government say the MSP is a floor? MSP will be a floor price.
You know, because it's very interesting that the opposition is attacking, or the Congress is attacking the Modi government, accusing them of cronyism. Let's be honest, many of the so-called cronies, the big businessmen who allegedly will monopolize these markets, were also around when you were in power. So I want to know suddenly, why is it that you believe that the Adanis, the Ambanis will take over in a way the entire sort of farm produce business? It seems at the moment that you are in a way playing on the fears of the farmers, real or imaginary.
You are assuming that the farmers are completely uninformed, uneducated, they know nothing, they are driven sheep. This is an insult to farmers. I would earnestly request you not to join the government in insulting farmers. The farmers today are educated, they are well informed, they know what's happening in the world, they know world prices, they know commodity prices, they know how commodity markets work. In our 10 years of UPA, one instance where we encouraged monopolization of any sector. Show me one instance where we allowed corporates to enter the agriculture sector. It's one thing for corporates to enter, say, petroleum or enter mining or enter trade, but it's a completely different thing for corporates to enter agriculture. Did we ever do anything or say anything that will encourage corporates to enter agriculture marketing? So don't put both in the same basket. Industry, yes, of course, corporates must be in industry. But why are you allowing corporates into unregulated agricultural markets? You are unregulating the market, you're allowing corporates. Therefore, the farmers are fearful.
From what I can see, it's now a question of sequencing. The difference between what you're saying and what the government is saying. You, as in your manifesto, also seem to suggest that the final stage would be in some form a completely new legislation, a completely amended legislation when it came to APMC, but it would come through a process. The government is, some would say, short-circuiting that process and giving, in a way, the farmers a new act. And the government is turning around and saying that it's only the Punjab farmers who've enjoyed the benefits of the mandi system who are out on the street. The other farmers are more than happy and already actually, in a way, interacting with private markets and benefiting from the same.
What about which private marketing is benefiting the farmer today? What is the situation in Bihar? Have you read the reports on Bihar? Every farmer in Bihar is selling at less than MSP after the APMC was completely repealed without putting in place alternative farmers markets. In Tamil Nadu, we've got 252 so-called APMCs. The entire turnover, mark my words, the entire turnover of all these 252 so-called celebrated APMCs is 129 crore rupees. It's a pittance. Tamil Nadu has really no regulated markets. The regulated markets are functioning well in Punjab and Haryana. What about the Rajasthan farmers who are protesting? What about the UP farmers who are protesting? What we want is a regulated, a lightly regulated market, multiple markets for the agriculture sector. Tell me what is wrong with that proposal.
So
you don't find fault with that proposal and you say APMC should go. You first establish lightly regulated markets all over the country which are accessible to the farmer, and then we'll talk about getting rid of the APMC.
No, so does that require having a regulated market under the present framework as the Narendra Modi government sees, does that require a complete repealing of the existing laws? Do you not see that these laws can be amended to ensure that those concerns that you address are also met?
We are quibbling. I'm talking about repeal and reenactment in one bill. Please go and consult a lawyer or draftsman, consult a legislative draftsman. Repeal and reenactment in one bill. Agree on a new bill. Agree on a new bill. Introduce it. The last clause of the bill will repeal. So you're meeting the farmers' demand of repeal of the existing law, which is full of holes, full of riddles, and doesn't satisfy the farmer. You have enacted a new law which satisfies you and the farmers. First, agree on what the provisions will be.
So it's very interesting what you're saying. You're actually saying if these consultations result in some kind of agreement or some kind of broad consensus, then you can have a fresh session of parliament or indeed the next session of parliament and repeal and reenact at the same time.
You can tell your government, I'm willing to offer my services free and draft that law for them. First, let them come to an agreement.
I don't think, Mr. Chidambaram, they are going to accept your offer that we are going to ask Mr. Chidambaram to come and reenact in a way the law for us. But either way, the fact is that, I mean, are we reaching, you believe, this has become a prestige issue, some believe, for the government.
For whom? For whom?
For the Narendra Modi government. They believe that
why does a democratic government take anything as a prestige issue? The government is supposed to be for the welfare of the people, welfare of the farmers in this case. Why does it take it as a prestige issue?
Because there's a sense that as I said at the outset, that the opposition is not, according to the government, about the farm reforms anymore. It's how do we target and undermine the Modi government.
This is just a myth. The Modi government is sitting pretty with 303 seats for the BJP alone, and I think about 350 or so for the NDA. How can we target the Modi government in 1.5 years when they've got a 5-year term? We are the opposition. It is the opposition's role, duty to espouse the cause of the people. The farmers today are on the roads, are on the borders, protesting, going on hunger strike, leaving their families at 17 or 18 days. They have no access to medicines, no access to proper toilets, sanitation, drinking water. Langar is serving them. Don't you see the plight of the farmers today? Don't you see the intense suffering the farmers are willing to undergo in order to protect the farmers' interests? And ministers are sitting in their bungalows and calling the farmers Naxalites, urban Maoist agents of Pakistan and China, Tukde gang. Why doesn't the minister fast for 17 days?
Mr. Chidambaram, clearly this is a case of P. Chidambaram ko gussa kyun aata hai? Why are
No.
I mean, you've been a reformer and you worked through reforms in the process post 1991. Is part of the problem, as has been suggested by some bureaucrats, that too much democracy makes it difficult to reform? Sometimes reforms have to be literally pushed, push their way. You have to push through reforms. You can't sort of build consensus. That's not easy.
That's a shameful remark. If any officer in our government had said there is too much democracy in the country, we would have admonished him. We would have admonished him. The press would have called for his resignation. Here, the media is silent, tamed into submission or taken over. Nobody has called for his resignation. I'm not saying he should resign. The Prime Minister should have admonished him for saying there's too much democracy. My case is democracy is being diminished every day. And here is a bureaucrat saying there's too much democracy. I retorted by saying there's too much bureaucracy in this country.
Does democracy easily coexist with reform, sir?
Of course, in 1991, Mr. Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister and Dr. Manmohan Singh as Finance Minister and I in my small way as Commerce Minister brought about reforms in a minority government. We were just short of a majority without this kind of massive protests. We brought about far-reaching reforms in industrial licensing, in trade, which affects millions and millions of people. Were the people on the borders of Delhi going on hunger strike and protesting? Of course, reforms can be done in a democratic government. Do not other democratic governments do reform? Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Sweden, Denmark, they're all democracies, true democracies. Don't they do reform?
Okay. Let's leave it there, Mr. Chidambaram, because in a way, you've already made an offer on this show that you are ready to, in a way, help the government redraft a new law. Which
Can I have one?
Yes.
Even if I'm saying it, I'm a pretty decent draftsman. If the government wants my services, it's available.
Okay, let's leave it. That would be bipartisan consensus and the true democratic spirit. P. Chidambaram, thank you very much for joining me here on India Today. Thank you.